Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Construction Over Coffee. I'm your host, Jeff Raymond with Raymond Search Group, and today I have the CEO and owner of Coffey Testing, Don Watt, with me. Don brings over 25 years experience in construction materials testing. She is originally from Canada and moved to the land down under Australia in 2001. Started working for Coffey in 2003. She's part of a management buyout in 2019. Dawn holds an MBA, and she has a deep passion for leadership, organizational behavior, and is very proud of the services that Coffey offers to the construction industry. And the services they offer include ensuring independent verification of construction materials and critical construction methods. Fun fact, she is also, or was also, the league commissioner of the Australian Ice Hockey League. Don, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Jeff, for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So, Don, let's start. You know, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into the industry, and what things are like for you, right now.
Yeah, certainly. So I was a university student, convinced that I wanted to be a part of Greenpeace. I was looking for some degree or diploma that would help me um, get into, I guess, the environmental side of earth
Hmm.
sciences. But I did come from a rather small town in Alberta, Canada, and my university options were limited. And so I ended up doing a degree in geography and a diploma in civil engineering technology with a view to going into environmental sustainability. And when I
Hmm.
first graduated, there was not really any opportunities in that space where I was from. It wasn't a big town in Alberta, Canada, and I ended up in the construction materials testing side of civil engineering technology, mainly working on construction sites, doing concrete testing, soil
Hmm.
testing, rock testing, aggregate testing for the materials that were being used in those construction sites. I ended up moving
Hmm.
to Australia a few years later and working for Coffey Testing. Uh, did a bit of environmental work and actually found I quite enjoyed the construction materials side more, and ended up various management positions. I've held probably every position you could hold over the past 16, 17 years, from quality manager to customer service to safety manager, general managers of various regions. Ended up being the CEO. And then when the company was offered us a buyout, to buy out our section of the business, which was the construction
Hmm.
materials testing arm of the engineering firm, we jumped at the opportunity in 2019.
Great. Thank you for that. It's a really interesting background and kind of how, things have changed and evolved, and it definitely is a little different than what you might expect to see. What was, I guess, was there anything that really pushed you towards that direction early on and that it kind of pushed you towards that path versus staying a more traditional path?
I think it was the inability to find a job at the very beginning.
That'll do it.
As I said, the environmental space,
Hmm.
and knowing that I needed to get into the industry. Um,
Hmm.
and then I did start out, like I said, on a construction site as a concrete technician, and I got a lot of support. And it wasn't a lot of females in the industry at the time. I think I was the only one
Hmm.
in this particular city that I was working in, of about 60,000 people. And it was a bit of a novelty, being this female technician on site back in 1996. And
Wow.
we got a lot of support to succeed.
Wow. That's a really interesting segue into something I wanted to cover, which is construction, architecture, engineering. The industries that support those are typically very male dominated. So I was going to ask, what was it like being a female in those in that environment? And please tell me more.
And it's had its ups and downs. Like I said, I got a lot of support, particularly when I was younger. in Canada. I did get some feedback one day. I had washed my hands of some concrete and then I put hand lotion on, and I had some feedback from the client that, if you want to be taken seriously, you really shouldn't be putting hand lotion on site. And I said, well, there's a lot of lime in the material, and I want to make sure I don't injure my hands. No, you need to be taken
Yeah.
seriously as a woman. You need to be taken seriously. Stop putting hand lotion on site. And I thought, okay, that's a bit of interesting feedback.
Yeah.
Um, but it's not entirely untrue. It does. There is an element of being needed to be taken seriously on a construction site
Mm.
as a woman, and not through any fault of any of the males. It's simply through traditional backgrounds, how we as culture and society have always had our traditional roles. It's changing. It's not
Hmm.
changing very fast. I will say that. I probably have 250 employees, and I would think that of the technicians, less than 10% would be female. That's something we're actively trying to turn around, but it's not changing rapidly. And that starts all
Hmm.
the way back to high school, and
Sure.
how we can, I guess, entice females into the industry. Um,
Yes.
but I have had ups and downs, but mainly ups. Mainly ups. If you're good at your job and show that you know what you're doing, really at the end of the day, gender doesn't matter.
That's something I've always appreciated about the AEC world in the trades. More often than not, it's very much tends to very much be a meritocracy. Not always, but most of the time. And the industry as a whole, the people want to see others do well and they want to lift others up. Here in the States, um, you mentioned about getting more women, which I think is also more representation of individuals that don't fit that stereotype of what we think of when we think of, someone in the trades or in the AEC world. Is it the same or was it the same in Canada? Is it the same in Australia? Tell us a little bit about the markup or the makeup of the industry and right now. What is it like and what are y'all doing to try to fix that?
So I think that there certainly still is that perception that a tradie, as they're called in Australia, a tradie
Mhm.
um, is a man with muscles, because tradies
Okay.
lift buckets and use tools, and that perception is changing a lot, particularly in our fly in fly out work, particularly in the mines. We're finding all of these studies that show that women tend to be very meticulous and diligent in the work that they do, and traditionally, um, the I guess with automation, there's a lot of automation, a lot of equipment that's being built these days that is doing the effort. There's a lot of effort that goes in um, through automation, through lifting machines, through apparatuses. And so there is the less of that requirement that a tradie needs to be a big, brawny, burly man. What
Sure.
we're particularly doing is that we're really bringing in the science and the why behind what we do in construction materials testing. So,
Hmm.
construction materials testing, our job is to verify the quality of the materials that are going into a site. So, a design might call for a certain MPa strength of concrete. So, we test it before it goes into the formwork or on site to make sure it's the right strength that's been called for in the design. We might have a certain density of the soil or type of soil or gradation of rock that needs to be used when building a road. So we're telling people that they're using the right material, and then we're watching them place the material, that it's being constructed properly. There is actually a
Hmm.
lot of science that goes into that. There's actually a lot of math that goes into that. There's a lot of theory, a lot of biology. Actually, we often
Sure.
have organic materials and things that go into the earth to need to be able to understand the properties of the materials that we're using. And quite often we find that when we go into careers days and high schools and colleges and we start talking about not just You need to lift buckets. You need to be strong. You need to be outside. You need to be wearing fluorescent clothing and a hard hat. And we start talking about the science and the numbers and why we do what we do. We get a lot more interest. We get a lot more interest from all kinds of people, and particularly females.
Awesome. It's interesting, and our subscribers will hear us talk about this on the show pretty often, is there's just seems to be this lack of awareness and lack of understanding as to what these industries actually offer. If you ask the typical individual that is not in the industry or doesn't have any knowledge, experience, or friends or family, you say, well, what do you think folks in construction do? It's the exact stereotype or misunderstanding that you referenced. Fluorescent outfits, hard
Mm.
hat, big burly muscly guy.
Bob the Builder.
And yeah, Bob Bob the Builder.
Yeah.
And there's this whole other side that really gets missed. And we'll talk about this often, where you go into like go into a classroom, take 50 or 100 kids, middle school, high school, and say, raise your hand, if you want to go into tech. A bunch of hands go up. Raise your hand if you want to become a doctor. A bunch of hands go up. And the same thing and so on for lawyer, and for those that want to go into finance, banking, accounting. And then you say, raise your hand if you want to go into construction materials testing. Crickets. Architecture. How about a superintendent of a school? No, construction. And I think those industries really struggle with a few things, but one of them is a lack of awareness and understanding of what it is that you can actually do. And I think that needs to start at a young age.
Yes.
And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that and how we can work with that.
I think one thing that Australia does much better than Canada, and I'm not quite certain how the United States does it, but I know that Australia does do it better than Canada, is really letting kids know about the trades in school. You don't have to go to university to be a successful individual.
Hmm.
For certain careers, you do. But you don't have to say I got to grade 12 and if I don't go and do post-secondary education, then I'm not going to be as successful as my family or my peers. And Australia has an excellent trade school path. You can make a choice at the end of grade 10. You can stay down the grade 11, grade 12 path that will send you to university, or you can go down a path that will send you to trade school or into a trade. Where we do need to improve is going into the schools and speaking to everyone and not making the assumption that the females are going to go down the
Yes.
path of the university, and not making the assumption that all of the males are going to go down the path towards the trade schools, and treat them as a whole. Treat them as one large cohort, I guess,
Hmm.
and explain as though every one of them has the opportunity to do those things. So, in Australia, construction is the largest employer. We discovered that during COVID. And one of the things the Australian government did extremely well was make sure that at no stage was any construction shut down during any of the pandemic. So when we had obviously shops and restaurants and everything that they had around the world closed, construction stayed open, being the largest employer. And the reason why it's the largest employer is because it's not just Bob the Builder. It is absolutely everything to do with the construction industry, from what I do at construction materials testing to the cooks that are in the camps in the far west of Australia, in the middle of the outback, who are sitting on a gold mine. It is uniform suppliers, it's truck suppliers, it's health and safety, it's quality. Construction is the largest employer in Australia. And I don't know that kids are told that.
I had no
Um,
idea.
I didn't know until the pandemic hit. It's not really spoken about, and
Hmm.
all of the different aspects. So if you walk into a school and say, do you want a job when you get out of high school? Construction, there's always jobs in construction. It's a skills shortage across Australia at the moment, and construction is one of the hardest that's hit. And if we can get into these schools and really break it down. What can you be doing? Where in construction can we go with respect to health and safety? Where can you go if you wanted to be in quality management? Where can you go if you wanted to be in technical? Where did you want to go if you want to be in IT? And I think it's really imperative, and all, the onus is on the construction industry to get together, industry bodies, and really make it relevant for high school kids.
Are there any organizations that you know of in your neck of the woods that are working to do that? Here in the US, one of the big ones is Build Your Future, BYF.
Okay. What I've found in Australia is we have states like the United States does, and each of these organizations tend to be state based. And it really depends on, I guess, how they're feeling at the moment with respect to their skill shortage in their area. It doesn't seem to be as nationally coordinated. So we do have some, I guess, trades certificates that are national,
Hmm.
and the government has given companies like myself rebates if we are to enroll our staff into these trade certificates. But by then, we've already had to go out, source them, employ them, try to get them into the industry. What we're seeing in each individual state. So New South Wales, where I'm from, there's an organization called Transport for New South Wales. So they're responsible for all of the roads, rail, port infrastructure in New South Wales. They're going into schools. They are having programs where they're looking at internships. They're attempting to get people into the industry, but it's not coordinated. So as a national company that I own across Australia, it's very piecemeal, state by state. So it's almost the onus is on me to coordinate something for my own business. And so we actually have just in the past few months, we've started going out to high schools with what our employee value proposition is. What can we do for you as someone coming into our industry, as someone who we want to come to work for us? What value would you find coming to work for us?
That's great. It's interesting you talk about how at the state level it's all decided and kind of left up to them. Here it's very much similar. And state where I live and where we're headquartered, Florida, has put a lot of money into bringing awareness, into doing trade, voc school, into making it seem not like a secondary option, but as a primary option for those that are interested. Two other states that I know that are doing a lot are Texas and Georgia. And you're absolutely correct. It needs to start young and in school, and doing things like coming in as an employer and talking about, hey, you don't have to just swing a hammer all day and put on a hard hat. There's A and B and C and D and E, and depending what your personality is, what your leanings and preferences are, and what your strengths are, there could be something for you. You just don't know it yet.
Yeah. We've actually taken a step just this month. For the 20 odd years that I've worked at Coffey, our business has been 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. That is how construction operates in Australia.
Yes.
That is how my business lines up. It occurred to us that that's children, teenagers, they can't work those hours. So they're working at Kentucky Fried Chicken for a third of the wage that I offer from 4 till 9 p.m. because that's after school hours. So I said to my general managers, why don't we have a 4 to 8 p.m. shift? We've never had a 4 to 8 p.m. shift, but why don't we have a 4 to 8 p.m. shift? Why don't we have a
Wow.
4 to 8 p.m. shift that has a junior manager watching over 5 or 6 high school students per office to come in and do that work so that the very next day the senior techs are in and all of the work that would be done by juniors to prepare for the testing the next day is done for them. And it was a long pause in the conversation, and everyone thought about it and went, why don't we do that? So we have just implemented this new shift. We're kicking it off next week, and we're doing it in the head office that I'm in Newcastle, and we're going to roll it out in other labs if it's successful. And we are starting with 6 high school students that we've grabbed. And we have every hope that they'll come and they'll, during the school holidays, they'll work our day shift for us. And then when they get out of high school, it might be something they want to do as a career.
Good luck with that.
Thank you.
4 to 8. Did not even think of that. But that makes sense.
Yeah.
Construction and those industries as a whole, they're great, but in a lot of ways, um, their biggest challenge is they're very antiquated in systems, processes, and in thinking and in habits and 7 to 3:30. Why? Well, that's just what we've always done.
Yeah.
It's just the industry. Why change? Um, and I mean, we see the same thing with recruiting. Well, we've always done it this way. Why would we change? Well, as you just showed, if you want to address a portion of the market that has historically been left out, give them an option that appeals to them. Makes perfect sense. Um, what are some other things that, let's talk about that younger demographic for a moment. What are some other things that your firm has been doing to attract that demographic, that age group of folks to your firm and to the industry?
So we just did a exercise to determine what our employee value proposition is, and the firm that we employed to do an analysis on us basically came back and said, you don't really have a good one. I can't see from your website. I can't see from your job ads. I can't see from your LinkedIn posts or your Facebook posts what your employee value proposition is. Why does someone want to come work for
Mhm.
you? So
Sure.
we've done a very large exercise, and we're just about to revamp the website. We've already revamped our job ads to let people know what is it that they can get from us. And travel. We've got 20 offices across Australia, and we're always moving
Well,
people around. Always, we're slow here. Can you go to Perth for 2 weeks? And so these young kids, it's like I get to travel. Yeah, well, we put you up in accommodation. We
well,
pay for your meals. We fly you out there. You get to see a new state. On the weekends, you get to go and travel and see that area you may never have been. You can go see the crocodiles in Darwin. You can go see um, Melbourne and go see the city lights. So we've got all of
catch a
these.
footy game.
Catch a footy game. That's right. So travel is a big one that we try
Mhm.
to put to people. Overtime. So a lot of these younger kids are wanting to save. Maybe they want to save to go overseas. Maybe they want to save to get their first house. And a lot of times, some jobs are salaried positions. We're an hourly rate job, so you get paid time and a half, double time if you stay back, and we're that busy that we need you to stay back. There's an
Yeah.
opportunity to make substantially more than their peers, particularly their peers that might be having part-time jobs that are at university. Um, I think working outdoors, no student loans, jumping right in to a job straight away. You don't have a student loan that you're going to carry on your back for 20 years afterwards, but you've still got the opportunity to be a manager in 8 to 10 years on well and truly six figures. Like we have
Yep.
careers here. So showing them that it's a career, showing they can jump right in without student loans. They can work outdoors. They can work indoors. They can do science, math, IT, quality, safety. There's all these different jobs, but the travel. I think the travel is the one that's really interesting. A lot of the people that we're speaking to at the moment.
Interesting about the travel. These younger generations, I guess, from millennials forward, compared to some of the older generations. I mean, we speaking as a someone born during the millennial times, there's a passion for travel, for exploring, for seeing more than what you're born in. I mean, you think about, I don't know what it is in Australia, but here in the States, individuals born before that, you grew up in this hometown and you tended to get a job in that area and stay there, and maybe you'd go somewhere else on vacation and that was it. That was all you did. And the younger generation wants to travel. They want to explore. They want to see what else is out there, and they want to see what satisfies their curiosity. Makes perfect sense that the travel's a big perk for them.
Yep.
And travel's expensive too.
It
So
is
if that's
expensive,
covered,
so
that's great.
you
It
do
is.
need the money to do it. Yeah.
Cool. What do I know? Let's go back to 2008-9 for a moment, and we'll segue into that. The industries as a whole here in the States, there's more demand for folks in those industries than there are that are people that are able to do it, right? These industries here, the last statistics I read said the industry is losing 5 to 8% of the people per year.
Yeah.
That's a massive number. Um, and there's not enough people left to replace them. And you can look at all the reasons for that. We can talk about the skills gap, lack of awareness. Two of the big ones we think of, if you think back to 2008-9, awful recession.
Mm.
I know Australia was hit brutally hard by it.
Yeah.
And you had a lot of folks here that, because it was, it really affected retail and construction, a lot of folks retired early.
Yeah.
Maybe they were 5 or 10 years away. They said, screw it, I'm out. Others left the industry for what they would consider to be more stable industries. And you had some workers that would do it in some parts of the US seasonally,
Yeah.
based on weather, and they moved into something that they considered to be more stable. Did you all see the same thing during that time?
Yes. I think though it was different than what we're seeing now. So back
Hmm.
then, the recession meant that there was no spend. There was no government spend on infrastructure. There was less major projects going on. There was less construction going on. So there was actually no jobs. And we did see that. And when the recession ended and government started spending again and overseas companies started investing back in gold mining and the price of coal went back up. It was a very, very big coal mining country, Australia, and the price of coal
Hmm.
was terrible. And so it was not worth the money to pull it out of the ground. So if the resources aren't worth the money to pull it out of the ground, they stop doing it. There's no jobs. And
Hmm.
so we did see people leave the industry then, but they left it because they were forced to. What we're seeing now is completely the opposite. There is so much infrastructure spend. The price of resources has gone back up. New mines are
Hmm.
popping up everywhere, whether it's coal, whether it's gold, whether it's bauxite, um, iron ore, whatever is happening. We are ready to employ way more people than there are. And we've had two major things happen over the past 2 years that we can see, we believe. One, a lot of people are retiring, and I don't believe that the world has kept up with the birth rate, that there are
Hmm.
enough people actually coming through in Australia, Canada, the United States to be able to fill those positions that are retiring. So that's
Hmm.
one thing. The second thing, and I don't know if you're calling it the same thing in the United States, but in Australia, we're calling it the Great Resignation. And it is the mindset that a lot of the world got after COVID. COVID was scary. COVID was life changing.
Hmm.
COVID was something we never thought we'd see in our lifetimes. The world stopped. And a lot of people reassessed their lives. They reassessed sitting at home, being with their families. They reassessed living on less money because you couldn't do anything. You couldn't go out for dinner. You couldn't go to the movies. You couldn't go travel overseas. You didn't need to save. Um, there was a lot more discretionary income. And people realized they could live on less. And maybe they didn't need to be working so extremely hard in a job that maybe they weren't completely happy with.
Hmm.
And people have worked out that you never know when the whole world's going to stop and your life is going to change in an instant. So I think I'm going to do what I want in my life. And so we've had people leave our industry and they've resigned and I've gone, oh, are you going to the competition? What can I do to stop you? No, I'm going to start a food truck. It's always been my passion to go start a food truck. And another fellow, I'm going to make a t-shirt business. I've always wanted to do a t-shirt business. If there's one thing COVID's taught me, I need to do what I want now while I'm young. So what we're seeing right now is this great resignation of people walking away from traditional jobs to do something that makes them happy simply for the fact that life can change in an instant. Now,
Hmm.
I believe that will change. I believe when people start traveling again, when people start traveling the world, when borders open up, when the last bit of the COVID restrictions are over, there will be this need for people to get back into spending money, going out, traveling, and there will be a requirement for more secure job security. That is my belief. But in the meantime, we are seeing what the world, or what at least Australia is calling, is the Great Resignation.
Yep. We saw that started about a year and a half ago. Things were definitely interesting in the US. I think the US opened quicker and a little more aggressively than Australia in that part of the world. And you had a large percentage of the population that said, I either don't like the company I'm working for, and this is for all industries. I either don't like the company I'm working for, or I don't like the industry and the job I'm doing, and I want to see what else is out there. Um, in construction here in the States, there's been a lot of money going into, a lot of federal money, a lot of state money going into new projects. Demographically, there's been a shift from some parts of the country to others. And when those people move, I'm sure Australia has probably seen parts of that too, where one part of the country becomes a little more desirable than the other. And when you have such a large shift in population, those people need grocery stores to shop at. They need movie theaters to go to. They need places of worship, schools, etc. And, kind of here in the States, the boom has been driven by some fiscal policy and spending, but a lot of it has been shifts in demographics. The industries as a whole, they're doing great, but if you look at pockets of the US, some are drastically outperforming
Mm.
others. And I'm curious if you're seeing that in Australia too. Is that industry really booming, countrywide, or is it some parts are doing better than others, and what's driving that?
So it is countrywide, and it is largely driven by the investment from the government to ensure that, like I said, construction needed to stay open to keep the country alive during the lockdowns.
Hmm.
And those projects are still coming. They've been approved, they're in the budget, and they're still going to be completed.
Hmm.
Um, so no, I would say there's not one particular state that's doing better than the others. They're all doing extremely well. What's
Great.
I think also happening is traditionally construction was one of the best payers for wages,
Hmm.
and there's such a shortage of staff in every industry, as you said, across the board, that people can go and be a barista and make coffees for the wage that you traditionally only get if you're working overtime on a construction site. They're going and
What?
they're getting
Wait a sec.
paid. Yeah, they're getting paid astronomical amounts to go work in retail. The retail rates have gone through the roof because they can't find staff to work retail. So um, it's no longer traditionally that if you wanted to jump right into making a good wage straight away, you went into a trade and you went into plumbing, or you went into construction, or it's now you can go and make similar money working at a cafe, working at Kmart. It's the wages. We're such a staff shortage here that people can up and walk into another job and not feel too much pain as far as their income.
If I'm curious, what would be those wages you're talking about for reference in Australian dollars, for the overtime in the trades and then baristas and retail? What does that look like?
So we talk hourly rate here. I know
Hmm.
that I'm paying my 4 to 8 shift, my high school students from my 4 to 8 shift, $25 to $30 an hour, for just the 16, 17 year olds. I know that there are baristas that are being advertised, so coffee makers at $38 an hour. Um, and so,
38.
yeah, with the cooks, cooks in small cafes are commanding that money, and they might be 20, 21, 22 years old. We've got um, administrators that we're trying to outsource. So some virtual administrators, um, just booking in samples, um, I guess typing up reports, things like that, and we're paying anywhere from $45 to $65 an hour for
My mind is
secretarial
blown.
work. Yeah. So when they're commanding, because the skills shortage is so great in Australia, when they're commanding those dollars, you're fighting everyone for the same group
Yes.
of people, the same workers. I think our unemployment rate 6 months ago was below 1%.
Here it's about 3.4 to 3.6, and that's historical lows. And your
Yeah.
employment rate is under 1%.
and
That's
and
pressure.
yeah, we normally sit around 5.5. I think traditionally over the years.
That I can't even imagine. I know
Mm,
here in the States things are pressured 3.4, 3.6, under one. Phenomenal.
yeah,
And the wages, I'm still processing it, Don, honestly.
yeah.
Nothing against baristas. Um, wow. What would individuals make in your company that, and I know it's all over the place, but say for example, what would mid-level or senior level project managers make on an hourly wage at your firm?
So we generally tend to put them on a salary,
Okay.
with potentially single time overtime. So if we were to look at, um, so a senior level project manager doing a fly in fly out job would probably be on 100 to $125,000 a year, um, and they're probably only about 26, 27 years old. We've got some technicians on some jobs that are making closer to 180, $200,000 on fly in fly out, because of the overtime, the site
Mhm.
allowances, and things like that. So it's substantial, um, the wages that you can make in the industry if you're prepared to travel, if you're prepared to run a project, if you're prepared to go into the outback.
Work hard, of course, and
Mm,
learn a new skill set or master a skill set.
yeah.
And I feel like these are some of the things that the next generation should be knowing about, and even the current generations. I don't know if what it is in Australia, but growing up for my age group, I'm 35 for reference, for our age group, if you went to the trade school or the vocational school, if you did anything other than go to college, the stigma was because you weren't smart. That was the stigma, or that you couldn't do better than that. And that was a tough stigma. Thankfully, you know, my family was blue collar from the trade, so that didn't apply to us. It didn't We didn't look at that way. But you see what the stigma was for other people, and you have to think that that pushes people who would otherwise be interested away from that.
Mm,
And then the other part, if you have families of doctors or lawyers and they demand that their next generation goes into it, well, what if those folks wanted to be architects? What if they wanted to be technicians, project managers, or they wanted to go bid and estimate work?
yeah.
And I'm curious do y'all still have the same stigma there, or things were looked at more favorably with construction being the largest employment group?
Absolutely. As I mentioned before, in Canada, I certainly felt that stigma. I felt pressured to
Sure.
go to university, and I ended up with a 4 year
Mhm.
geography degree and no ability to get employment after that. So I went and I did a 2 year community college civil engineering technology diploma and was employed immediately. And off the back of that, ended up with an MBA years later, just from to learn how to be a CEO, basically. But here, as I said, there is that defined career path, and there is absolutely no stigma around taking the trade school path versus taking the university path. And that is something that Australia does very well. And my own sons, I own the business. They've both worked here while they were going to school. They chose, one's a podiatrist and one's doing psychology. So they chose to go different paths. And it was very much, they could see the opportunity for career. They could see the opportunity for great wages, no student loans. They were raised in that environment with me, but that was their choice. And so there's really, I don't believe, any stigma in Australia. It is
Right.
very perfectly fine, and quite um, looked favorably upon for people that want to go and be plumbers and tilers and carpenters. And so I think we're better off in that space than North America, having come from both.
US, take note. Let me
Mm.
ask you this. What are those folks portrayed as in movies, cartoons, TV shows? Is there any stereotype there?
We get a lot of American TV shows, so there's not a lot of Australian cartoons. I think all of the, I mean, I haven't watched cartoons in a long time because my boys are in their 20s. But from what I remember, we watch American cartoons here. I don't think there's a lot of Australian cartoons, so be the same, I
Hmm.
guess. Yeah.
Here in the US, the portrayal is typically guys catcalling or whistling as a woman walks by. They tend to portray them as not that bright, kind of
Mm.
brutish, plumber's crack, and those archetypes I think have lasting impressions too. So here, it's something we need to do. In a perfect world, I would love to see a TV show or cartoons for these kid shows that specifically portrays them in a good, strong light, where they're not doing these things that make them appear as who they actually aren't.
Mm.
And that's one thing that we'd love to see, and that's a pet project we're working on the side, and trying to find a studio that will support that effort. Um, let's pivot back to the pandemic for a moment because, I know each part of the world kind of experienced it differently. I know Australia, especially, y'all were hit very hard in terms of maybe not the same death rates or infection rates as the rest of the world, but things were closed. They were closed hard for a very long time. And I'm curious, it doesn't seem like there was on the surface, like they didn't shut construction down, but how did that affect the industry as a whole? What changed and what happened during that time?
It actually, there were higher levels of profit and um, activity than I've ever seen. I've never seen that much activity going on, as I said, with the government funneling all of this money to keep it open and making it an essential job. I'm not sure if that's what it was in the United States, if they're called essential workers, but here you had essential workers in your police officers and your nurses and your doctors, and construction was considered essential work to keep the country moving. It had to happen. So we actually saw higher levels of investment, pipeline work, um, quotations, projects coming than I've ever seen in all of my years working with this. What happened though was the requirement to, I guess, quarantine for 7 days. The
Hmm.
sick levels, the catching COVID, they being in the same house with someone that has COVID, not being allowed to get out. We had employees stuck at home up to 3 weeks at a time because one would get it and then someone else would get it and then someone else would get it in the family, and you're not allowed to leave house with it. And that's only as of next week, October 14th. Australia will no longer have a requirement to isolate if you have COVID. But there's still been very strict isolation rules even up until now. And so just the sick leave, the amount of money spent on sick leave, the inability to find staff. So projects were behind, projects are delayed, and they're still delayed because it's not just hit us. The constructors, they're behind because they can't find someone to drive a roller. They can't find someone to operate a backhoe. They can't find
Hmm.
staff. So massive amounts of projects happening, and it's all stalled and delayed because everyone is having people come down with COVID, or having the requirement to isolate while you have COVID. I mean, when you talk about traditional flus, um, those traditional flus, if you feel sick for 24 hours and you have the flu, you're back at work after 24 hours. Um, Now it's such a stigma on everybody that if you even have a sniffly nose, if you even have hay fever, you might have COVID. Don't come into the office for 3 or 4 days. So my spend on sick leave for the past 2 years has certainly shot through the roof. And then trying
Mhm.
to replace those people with casual workers, to attempt to backfill them for a day when they're missing is now not just one day. I now need to find someone to fill in for 7 to 10 days while someone doesn't enter the office because they either have COVID or they've got hay fever, and everyone is panicking because they're sneezing. So it has been very, very difficult to navigate the lack of employees and the sick leave.
For US folks, is sick leave paid by your company or the government, combination of both?
The company.
Okay. And then casual workers, are those temps? Like temporary workers come
Yep.
in and
Yep.
okay. How did any supply chain issues affect your firm? Run into any of those?
Yes, I mean we all had the toilet paper issues, so it's actually quite difficult asking people to come to work when there's no toilet paper in the office.
Mm,
Their vehicles. We still now, because we don't manufacture any vehicles in Australia, all vehicles come from outside, so they all have to be shipped in. We have zero vehicle manufacturing companies onshore. It's taking us 12 to 18 months to get a vehicle. You order a vehicle, 12 to 18 months. So I've got vehicles that need replacing because they're old, or they've got too many kilometers on them, too many miles on them, or I've simply grown, or I've won a new project and I need vehicles. I can't get vehicles, and then I can't. Everybody's going out to try and rent vehicles, and no one can rent vehicles because there's none in the country. And because there was no one was able to travel, a lot of the rental companies actually got rid of their fleet because a lot of rentals are for tourists. A lot of rentals
mhm.
are for people. We couldn't go between states. You couldn't drive from one state to another during lockdowns. So, a lot of car hire companies simply sold off their fleet so they could make the money then. And now we can't get any vehicles in. So it's still impacting us greatly, our inability to get out to site. We're starting to find rental vehicles are coming back in, and there's some used vehicles that are hitting the market, but the price of a used vehicle has gone through the roof. I'm not sure if it's the same in the United States, but because no one can
Mhm.
get new vehicles in, used vehicles are almost as expensive as a new vehicle.
There's a
And
joke that,
yeah,
go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, and
Go
and
ahead.
so that would probably be the worst part of the supply chain that we've experienced.
The vehicle market was out of control here for a bit, still is.
Yeah,
There was a joke that at one point owning a car was a better investment than investing in the stock market. People were selling cars for profits, and
yep,
you looked at the growth trajectory and the price of a vehicle on a chart, and at no point had that ever happened before. And the same things that happened there with rental companies selling off their fleet, downsizing, someone into bankruptcy, and when demand came roaring back, oh
yeah,
well. Here there wasn't, obviously a toilet paper shortage, which was nuts, the car rental. Even some of the smallest things like, okay, you know, some of the small components for electrical, for wiring, or this part or that part, this component, that component. And it was both, finished goods and raw materials where people still struggle to find them. Not only that, but the cost, some small components used in everyday commercial construction have gone up 3, 4, 500, sometimes over 1,000% in 2 years. And how do you even plan for that? You
yeah.
know, forget the forget the challenge of getting it. How do you plan for it just from a pricing model? A lot of companies are struggling with that, and I'm curious if it's the same out there.
I'm seeing it in throughout the industry. We don't necessarily have um, a requirement for components and little pieces like that. We've got large pieces of equipment that
Mm,
we've owned for years, and unfortunately, though it's aging and we are going to need to start replacing some equipment, we've been pretty good in that space. But I'm
mm.
absolutely seeing that with a lot of the sites that we're working on. We'll just be delayed. We've been delayed months starting some sites. We've ramped up. We've hired some people. We're ready to go, and they simply can't find a component that they need to do whatever it is to the site before we get on there, dewater the site or lay some cable or whatever it is that they need to do on that site. It's delaying, and we're all a bit nervous of laying people off or downsizing while we're waiting for these projects to start, because we're afraid of getting them back. So we're holding, but we are seeing that everywhere in the industry.
I often will pause and think, you know, the industries as a whole, how resilient they've been in the face of supply chain issues, in the face of labor shortages, in the face of inflation, in the face of wages going through the roof, and in everything going up. And yet here we are, the lights are still on, things are still moving, projects are taking longer, but they're still getting done. Sometimes I pause, I just say it, it's amazing anything's getting done at this point,
It's
and just
amazing. And
shows
I
how
question
resilient it
it is
is.
resilient, but I question how much longer it can go on for. I'm not sure, but we're sitting at $2.20 a liter for diesel at the moment. So that's about $8.80 a gallon
Yep,
for diesel. And it can't keep going on. And I know the war in Ukraine has had some impact on that, but there's potentially businesses that are eating into their reserves to try and hold on. Um, I'm not entirely sure if it is fully sustainable. We have been resilient, and that's fantastic, but can it go on for much longer? With the price of wages, the price of vehicles, and the price of diesel, there is a lot of pressure on companies. Inflation has gone through the roof. In Australia, I'm not sure. I know it's gone through the roof in Canada as well. I'm not sure where it's sitting at in America at the moment.
they claim somewhere between 8.5% and 9%.
Okay.
I feel the real inflation rate, honestly, is closer to 20 or 30%.
I can't
Um,
really tell you what Australia is to the button. I know I read Canada's yesterday and it was like 7.75 or something like that. I think we're sitting close to Canada, but I honestly believe you that I think there's a
yeah,
real number there as well.
yeah.
And I'm seeing it myself just when you look at the rates of what I'm paying for anything, down to milk and toilet paper and stationery and
Yeah,
diesel. And I think you're right. I think it's 20 to 30%.
I read somewhere where some economist looked at it and he said, "This is horseshit." Show me one thing that's only gone up 7.7% or 8%. Can't answer it. What are you accustomed to paying per liter for diesel gas? Go back 3 years. What was the typical? What were you typically accustomed to paying?
Dollar 50, $1.60 a liter, so $6 a gallon.
So it's gone up almost 50%, 40,
Yeah,
50%.
yeah.
And the driver with that too is it just it inflates everything.
Mhm.
The workers need to pay it to get where you have to go. You're paying to send people where they need to go. The equipment needs to come over, and the equipment needs to arrive on vehicles that cost that, and the equipment you're using is powered by that. It's getting nuts. We're seeing a little bit of relief here. In some parts of the U.S., you were seeing in the high fours, low fives. Some places in parts of California, it was, 7, $8 a gallon. It's insane. Here, we were accustomed to about, I know this is, when we talk about liters to gallons, about 240, 250 a gallon.
Wow.
So about 60 cents a liter, right? That was cool. That
I
was
know
fun.
I was in Hawaii in November 19, right before COVID hit in Feb 20, and I think
Hmm.
it was about 320. And I was
And
just
that
there
would be
in
considered a lot for the country,
yeah, and I was just there in
but
March. I
Hawaii's
think
high.
it was 5.95 in March for a gallon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember watching the price of oil, a barrel of oil, um, on the exchange actually go negative on the day. I don't know if that happened on the Australian exchange, or really don't know much about that, but here in the US on the exchange, a barrel of oil actually went negative,
Yeah,
and it was just wild to watch. And then, several months later, cool, it's at $50 a barrel, and here I think we're sitting somewhere between 81 and 83 a barrel, and the price of gas is stubbornly high. And you're right, how much longer? How much longer can this be tolerated?
correct.
If labor is strong, if the labor market is strong, and you know wage growth is there, great, but what if it's not?
Hmm,
What's the breaking point?
that's what I
And
wonder.
that's what a lot of folks are asking. And are we there yet? I think in short, um, if you could have a piece of advice you'd want to share with somebody who is either looking at getting into the industry, new to it, and really wanting making a mark, whether it be a sentence, a paragraph, whatever it is, what would you encourage them to do? And how do you suggest they spend their time?
I think that jump in and try everything. I think that too often people go in and say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this all day long. And there's an opportunity. The one thing about construction is that we're on a site and this company
Hmm.
provides X service and this company provides Y and this company provides Z. And we all talk to each other all day long and we're using each other.
Hmm.
Like, go and try it all. Go and work with soil. Go and work with concrete. Tell someone you're interested in the safety side of things. Tell someone you want to be part of the quality auditing system. Put your hand up and say, I'll do that. I'll check on that. And really find out all of the aspects that there are to do in the construction industry. Um, do your best, work your hardest. I like the word that you used earlier in our interview about meritocracy. It really is a meritocracy. There's absolutely no doubt about it. You are looked at based on how hard you work and what a good job you do. There is no issues in my opinion around gender anymore. There's very little discrimination. Um, Go and work hard and try everything. Put your hand up. Don't say no. Give it a shot.
Hmm.
And then once you've formed an opinion on all of the aspects of a construction industry, um, and you want to focus, then go ahead and focus. But don't focus too early. Don't be too specialized too early. Go and try your hand at everything, and and then give it a red hot go as to what it is that you actually are interested in.
That is phenomenal advice. Don, I know we're coming towards the end of the segment. It was so great having you on. So appreciative of you joining us. And if folks want to connect with you, reach out to you, where can they find you online?
LinkedIn. LinkedIn
LinkedIn.
is generally where people will reach out and I'll answer any messages that get sent.
Awesome. Well, Don, thanks for joining us. Subscribers are really going to enjoy this one.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome.